Hi, everybody. Hi, I'm Joseph Darius Jaafari. I am the founder and editor-in-chief of Lookout. I've been doing this for about 13 years now, but we started Lookout at the end of 2022. And what that is we are Arizona's only nonprofit, nonpartisan accountability news outlet for the queer community across Arizona. We're actually the only one across the nation as well that's specifically focused on queer communities. And so we started because we saw misinformation, disinformation about our community throughout Arizona. And we started in 2022, and we are a nonprofit news organization, like I said. So that wonderful charitable organization giving, you can give to us as well. We heavily rely. We don't do ad spends. We don't rely on paywall content. We are purely just philanthropy and individual donor given. I am on the list of tax credits. Yeah, we are considered a charitable organization. How, I don't know, but leave it to my executive director to figure that out. Okay, well, I'll go ahead and just start, and then we can just kind of go from there. So I want to start off with a bit of a story. And my slides would kind of show the headlines and everything like that. But essentially, before I moved to Arizona, if you guys remember the 2020 protests, the George Floyd protests, I was in Pennsylvania, I was in rural Pennsylvania reporting on a number of different things within police and prisons, and all of a sudden I got this phone call about a shot that was fired in rural Pennsylvania in Bedford. I'm not sure if a lot of you guys heard it, got some national publication after we published, but basically what happened is that there were these marchers going from Minneapolis over to DC for the 50th anniversary of the MLK Jr. I Have a Dream speech, right? And while these marchers were marching through Bedford, Pennsylvania, in the middle of the night, they got shot at. And the reason they got shot at is because there were rumors spreading online. Antifa was coming to their town. Antifa was coming to their town, and that they were going to burn down the Walmart, they were going to burn down their churches, they're all coming there to come after you, right? And this was all spread through misinformation on social media. All right, so that's me. I give you a bit of why you should listen to me. There's no need to listen to me, though, of course. And so this is the story that I'm talking about. And the big kind of takeaway from this was, why were people spreading this, right? Why were people spreading this information online? What was catalyzing them to spread this information? And the real answer is fear. But before we kind of get into kind of the why of people do this and how to spot this, we kind of need to have an understanding of what kinds of bad information is out there. Was this disinformation? Was this misinformation? Was this malinformation? And I think the thing that we need to kind of understand at the very front of this conversation is what kind of information is there. So as a primer, disinformation. Well, I'll just go down from the right to left. So malinformation, you can think of this as hate speech. You can think of this as bullying. You can think of this as trolling online. You can think of this as basically rumor playground mills, right? Where people are just making up stuff just to kind of be mean, right? That's a bit of a kindergarten way of describing it, but that's kind of how you can think of it. Then there's disinformation. And disinformation is pretty much, the information being spread with the intent and understanding it will mislead people. And finally, misinformation, it's the stuff spread online or in social circles that isn't always meant to harm, but it is fueled by disinformation. And so instead of focusing on malinformation, because I think we all kind of have understanding of what that is when you see name calling or when you see trolling online, what we really want to focus on today is misinformation and disinformation. Before we get to that, I'm going to do a video kind of that really sums it up in 6 minutes, but these are kind of examples of misinformation and disinformation. These are more so political speech, political talking points that are crafted to seem like fact, but in fact, when you actually look into where they're getting their sources, they're either misrepresenting a view or they're just creating something out of thin air. Scientific, how many times have you read somebody has posted a scientific journal, they're saying, well, it's in a scientific journal. And then you look at the data of the scientific journal and they deliberately left something out to skew the results. And finally, when you see stuff online, incorrect information posted online without being fact-checked, this is kind of where you get into the misinformation part, where something is probably done without harm, without the intent of harm, but it still damage is done. So I'm going to play this video real quick because this is a really good primer and really good understanding of where things were in 2022.
The spread of mis and disinformation continued to be a problem in 2022.
Misinformation is false or misleading information that is spread without malice. Disinformation is false or misleading information that is spread with malice. And the difference is intent, which is really, really difficult to verify. So sometimes I refer to the umbrella term of false or misleading information because the intent doesn't always matter.
Sarah Eniano is a disinformation analyst at the Anti-Defamation League's Center on Extremism and focuses on falsity spread by hate groups and extremists.
There's a really important relationship between mis and disinformation and extremism, and that is that false and misleading information, like what we see in mis and disinformation narratives, creates a perceived threat where no such threat really exists. When mis and disinformation go unchecked, the people that tend to suffer the most are the people that have historically been marginalized and vulnerable. We see it a lot with people of color. We see it a lot, especially recently, with LGBTQ+ communities and the many intersections of those things. And of course, we also see it in terms of anti-Semitism with the Jewish population.
Minority communities impacted by mis and disinformation in 2022 include the Jewish community. Anti-Semitic rhetoric and acts of violence are on the rise, according to the ADL. The organization tracked an increase both in acts of violence and online hate speech against Jewish people from 2020 to 2021. And based on preliminary reports for 2022, a similar increase is expected. The LGBTQ+ community. A record number of anti-LGBTQ+ bills were introduced in 2022. Online rhetoric mentioning the LGBTQ+ community alongside slurs like pedophile or groomer increased by more than 400% in the month after the Don't Say Gay bill was passed in Florida, according to the Human Rights Campaign and the Center for Countering Digital Hate. The Black community. The Great Replacement theory, or the idea that non-white individuals are being brought to the country to, quote, replace white people, has made its way to the mainstream, with nearly half of Republicans agreeing with it at least in part, according to a poll from the NORC and the AP. The white supremacist who killed 10 people in a Top supermarket in Buffalo this year was heavily influenced by this idea, according to the 180-page manifesto he posted online. While there have been moves to moderate hate speech or extremist rhetoric on various social media platforms, Eniano says neither companies nor the government did enough in 2022.
We have seen an increased amount of attention to it, although I don't know that we've seen enough attention from tech companies taking this stuff seriously to have really made a dent in that initiative so far. But it does absolutely require the cooperation of the government and of tech companies, along with organizations like the ADL, in order to collectively fight this issue.
Although deplatforming problematic or dangerous accounts and investing in robust content moderation are helpful tools in stopping the spread of disinformation, they aren't enough to prevent all false information from spreading online, especially when it comes to targeted attacks.
Those practices don't catch everything because a lot of hate speech, especially today, it's failed in irony, or using memes, or it's depicted as a joke, or it's depicted as celebrating the groups that they're actually demonizing. And that kind of comes from this 4chan culture of trolling.
Eniano says education about common conspiracy theories can help inoculate people from mis and disinformation.
One of the strategies that is meant to help stop the spread of mis and disinformation is called pre-bunking. This basically helps the public confront emerging narratives with tools that help them assess how credible they are. In other words, by explaining how conspiracy theories spread and why they're effective, and most importantly, why they're false, that's an important form of education for kids and adults alike. And with infinite information sources at our fingertips, we really need those tools in order to assess what is true and what is false, because sometimes it's really not that obvious.
Although a number of communities, including the Latinx community, were targeted by mis and disinformation campaigns prior to the 2022 midterm elections, Eniano says the spread of false and misleading information was less pervasive than experts thought it would be.
In 2022, we definitely saw some successes in the fight against mis and disinformation, particularly in the context of the 2022 midterms. Organizations like the ADL worked really hard in the months leading up to the election to preemptively debunk false and misleading claims about the election, including the claim that there was widespread election fraud being committed. And we did this because we were deeply concerned about the presence of extremist groups at polling places, or protests following the election, or candidates refusing to concede after losing an election. But these outcomes weren't as prevalent or as widespread as we thought they would be. And there might be other reasons for this, of course. People have seen the consequences of things like January 6th. And also, midterm elections tend to not be as polarizing as, say, a presidential election. But I think it's safe to say that in terms of the midterms, false and misleading information didn't win.
Eniano points out how everyone can have an impact on the fight against spreading false information online.
There is just more to vet than there's ever been. And that makes the need for media literacy education at any age, for the record, all the more critical, especially now. We all have a role to play in the fight against mis and disinformation, not amplifying harmful tropes, not taking the bait from trolls who want to fight you on social media or in social media comments. And importantly, until you know what is what, don't share anything. It's not good to speculate because it just adds more confusion into the atmosphere. These little things from just your average social media user can actually make a really, really big difference. And so again, it is a wholly collaborative effort, not just between organizations and the media and tech companies and the government, but from everybody who has the power to spread any information online. And a lot of us, if not most of us, do.
So that is a really good primer, and I kind of want to talk a bit about that last point that she made, which is basically, a lot of this comes down to media literacy. When we think about media literacy, we often think about how you consume news articles, but the reality is that most people are getting almost all of their information, especially the younger generations, especially the younger you get into generations, they're getting almost all of their information from social media. And it's really hard to vet all that stuff because a lot of the things that you're seeing on social media is then distilled through the poster's own eyes or how they read the news. We saw, for example, when Twitter moved over to X, and this was a small thing, but for all of us in news, we were freaking out. The fact that headlines were being taken out of pictures. So we, like as news organizations, we'd put a link into Twitter, and then it would pop up with the headline along with the photo, and that was our verified headline, right? But then when they took away the headlines, it allowed people to write their own understanding of what the article was at the very top. And there was actually this really interesting kind of dare I say, project of people kind of posting the wrong information from the article, and then eventually they changed it where now you see this tiny headline in the pictures now on X. So we wanted to kind of understand, well, first, before we get into, lead into this, when we started Lookout, we wanted to understand how people were getting their news. We wanted to understand why people were turning to social media versus verified news organizations such as us, right? And so we did a survey of about, and I've reported on this, I've come here and talked about the survey before, but it's more tailored for this now, but we interviewed 1,500 people across the state about where they get LGBTQ plus news, where they get their queer news, what is their trust level of it, and what are their primary complaints from it. And time again, what we heard is that they are concerned about mis or disinformation from news outlets themselves. And I'm gonna go into why in a second, but there's one quote from somebody who I think kind of like really sums it up, is that oftentimes in the media, what you're seeing is people using general tropes, stereotypes, and that kind of boils down to lack of nuance, and thus the reader is not being given all the information they need, and then they're distilling that information even further. It's almost like a game of telephone. So how do we spot this disinformation? I have a couple examples. So last year during Flagstaff Pride, there was a drag show in Flagstaff. And Wendy Rogers, who is one of our senators, she posted this online that basically said, hey, there's an all-ages drag show in Flagstaff. Shut it down. This is child abuse, and this is lurid sexual content, right? Now, a lot of people who are following Wendy Rogers, obviously they kind of buy into this, but because she has such a massive platform, this is disseminating down to different levels, right? So people who are kind of on the fence about drag shows or kind of like maybe new to this culture war that's very much one-sided are seeing this and going, oh my God, well, I've heard drag shows are really sexual and this is all ages. What the hell's going on? What actually was incorrect was, oh, the circle is wrong, but one, it wasn't all ages. It was 17 plus. Two, it's not considered child abuse because by law it's not considered child abuse. Three, lurid sexual content should be a dog whistle for anybody that's reading this. Now, this is an example of disinformation. It's taking some kernel of truth that's happening and framing it in a way that's actually causing harm, and it's with the intent of shutting something down that's opposite of the view. Now, it gets a little more complicated when we get to news. So, for context, this is from a listicle that was mentioning anti-LGBTQ plus people and their actions across the state. And this guy referenced he calls himself the Dark Shaman. And he shows up at Flagstaff Pride events, but he also shows up everywhere there is an LGBTQ plus event. He's usually alone, has pretty wild conspiracy theories, and isn't regarded as mainstream, even by legislatures, even by the far-right legislatures in our state. But the Republic felt the need to highlight him here. And I'm going to ask, is there any word that pops out to you that makes you go, knowing what I know about this person now that I've told you, any word that pops out as, maybe this isn't correct? Sorry, what? Oh, that's a good one. I didn't even notice that one. I have one specific one, but anybody else? No. No. Activist. So, for me, it's activist. Is this man an activist? Is he an agitator? Is he a domestic terrorist? This entire thing is about how he has had confrontations with the law, right? Is he just a local resident? These kinds of words matter when we report on these issues, but also it's important to recognize the news's role in promoting mis or disinformation. Does this term activist elevate this man's theories? On our side of news gathering, at least at Lookout, and a lot of the independent publications locally and nationwide, we would say yes. It elevates bad information. It elevates this person's ideas that are informed by disinformation and malinformation to become more widespread and mainstream. So the question for you, are you a good consumer of news, right? Have there been times where you are reading something and you're like, I don't know if this is being reported correctly? And where do you get your news? Why do you trust those news sources? And I kind of want to open it up because I'm really curious about, it's one thing for me to tell you, but so much of this is so personal. So I'm curious if anybody has a trusted news source that they go to all the time. AP, NPR, you sir. New York Times, okay. Sorry? Never heard of Midas Touch. Isn't that a jingle? Oh, okay. Oh, okay. I apologize. I don't know that one. Why do you trust that one? Why do you trust Midas Touch? She was saying that there's a lot of lawyers, experts who talk about things on their podcast. But
Yeah, so they have a lot of lawyers and experts, former prosecutors, things like that, and they talk about exactly what's happening in the news at the moment and how it's a threat to democracy, and they encourage people to do things, and and they talk about, right now they're sort of left-leaning, but they try to be as independent as possible. But with everything that's going on, it's really hard to not be
Right.
left. So they talk about, in terms of the news, they talk about things like explaining what it means legally, because there's so many lawyers involved,
Right.
and then you can see videos of things that people are doing that are not in the mainstream media, which is the primary reason that I consume them.
Cool.
Yeah.
Who said NPR? Why do you trust NPR? Or you could wait for the mic. I get a lot of AP, I get a lot of NPR, I get a lot of New York Times, Washington Post. Democracy Now!, BBC, CBC. Why do you like and why do you trust NPR?
I'm trying to think of a reason why. Can you give me a moment?
Sometimes it's really
Sheesh.
hard to know why. You just
Bossy, bossy.
okay. So she says they cite their sources. You can go to the original source. They make retractions. These are all, by the way, media ethics that we are required to, not required, you should do. Go ahead. Do you have any more? Okay. I want to kind of like talk on that before we kind of go deeper into this because I have a slide about like, the trusting news, model. But just so you know, I didn't put this in the deck, but I think it's important to know. Whenever you are seeing a new news website that you've never noticed before, go ahead and scroll to the very bottom of that page. Does that news organization contain an ethics page? Do they have a retraction policy? Do they put who is on their masthead? If they are independent, do they cite their where they get their money? We're part of 30 different news organizations called the Independent News Network, and that includes ProPublica, that includes Spotlight, that includes the 19th, all these different news organizations. And the way to get involved in that is that we have to publish anybody that gives us over $500, you are on our website. Anybody that gives, anybody that is a source that might be a donor, we disclose. Anybody that there might be a perceived conflict of interest, we add it at the very bottom. If there is a retraction, we put it at the very top of our story. We have all these things in place, and it is easy to find on our website so people can know exactly what our policies are so that you can trust us more. If you see a news website, these are called pink slime websites. They're all over now, but essentially they look like news websites and they sound like news headlines, but then we dig deeper, it's either funded by PACs, both Democratic and Republican. They're funded by, very far right organizations. They're funded by individuals who have an agenda. And you wouldn't know that unless you do some deep digging because none of that information is on their website. So good for pointing that out. So you probably have seen something like this. There's another one that kind of looks like a pyramid. And has anybody seen this before? Okay, a few people have. So, this is great to kind of start off, but this is a compiled list done by All Sides, which analyzes news bias. Like I said, there's another one that looks more like a pyramid, and while this is good, can anybody guess why this is bad?
There's only one spectrum, right? You need other angles.
So much about this is a lot to do with public perception. When you see people posting this stuff, because for example, during 2020 to 2022, this was being posted everywhere. I trust the Wall Street Journal because they are considered centrist. I trust, the Atlantic because they align with my views type of thing. There are some things where I'm like, I do not think the AP is center-left, based on my work with them, but also their fact-checking program and stuff like that. I definitely think the Wall Street Journal, even in their news and how they choose what stories to publish, because I have friends who are editors there who've told me that they don't publish certain things because they don't want to disalign with News Corp, which is owned by Rupert Murdoch, right? So much, and the Washington Times, that is definitely not center-right, but whoever is putting this together, it's all about perceived notions and public perception of what is center and what is left. So, and also, just an example, within the queer space, you would talk to a lot of people who do not think the New York Times is center-left because of their trans coverage, because the way they've been kind of covering the Palestine and Israel conflict. Definitely people see them as more center-right or right. So a lot of this has to do with public perception. And also, going to that point of when I mentioned the word activist, by calling that person an activist versus an agitator, I am squarely putting my news organization on the left side of this chart. Because anyone who is on the dark shaman side can say he's an activist, and that would be more balanced, right? So what do I do when I come across misleading information, right? The big thing is ask people questions. Ask people for source material. You saw in the video the woman who was basically saying, verify, try to find things. If you don't know, don't post. But a lot of this is, it's great for personal things of posting, but what do you do when you find somebody else that posts something that you know is incorrect? The part of us that really wants to fix things wants to just attack, right? We just want to get behind our keyboards and we want to fight back and say, no, this is wrong. You're an idiot. You're MAGA. You're a lefty. All that kind of crazy stuff. And instead of kind of have conversations with people. So the best thing to do is ask people questions. Where did you get the source material? How did you find out about this? And I have a really great example that I couldn't find the clip, and it really annoyed me because it's a perfect example of this. So in 2021, when the vaccine rollout happened, no, I'm sorry, it was 2020 when people were doing the long lines getting your rapid test, if you guys remember that. It was only a couple years ago, but it feels like a decade ago. I'm not sure if any of you guys heard this rumor that people were lining up and the lines were so long and you had to register to be in that line, you had to register for a time, and then people, because the times were so long and the lines were so long, that they left. They left the lines. However, a day later, they all got an email saying, you tested positive. Did anybody get to hear this rumor? One person did, okay. This rumor spread across Ohio, Pennsylvania, Arizona, California, Nevada, and even got filtered down to me, where people were like, what the hell's going on here? Because it was happening in prisons too. I was covering prisons. I'm like, how is it even possible? They don't even have emails in prisons. But I was like, maybe they're getting it through their messaging system. It was crazy. So the first thing you do is okay, who am I going to talk to verify this? So I found somebody on social. And I was like, hey, you posted about this. Where'd you hear it from? Oh, well, I heard it from a friend's mother who's posted about it. Okay, can I get in contact with the friend's mother? Well, I'm not sure, but yeah, let me try to contact the friend's mother. Where'd you get this information? Oh, I heard it from a friend's friend that posted about it. And I believe it was the Ohio Dispatch that ended up actually doing a story about this, and they couldn't find the source for this rumor that had spread all across the nation and sowed mistrust. And at that point, instead of people asking questions, they just reposted. And the damage was already done, because even though the rumor was debunked, it spread across 6 states. And how many people did it spread across? That's just what we know about. Did it go internationally? That kind of harm it's immeasurable and it's incredibly harmful. So I mentioned this earlier. So don't fight. I'm a part of a coalition with PEN America, and what they do is they try to really battle disinformation across the country. And what our part in that is we go into rural places across the state and suburban places across the state, and we ask people, where do you get your information and why are you posting this information? What do you need to learn in order to kind of teach yourself how to bring in news to your ecosystem better? And the biggest thing people say back is, I'm tired of being shut down. We saw it a lot. I'm sure everybody here has had instances during COVID where family members just kind of cut each other off because they were fighting too much about certain things. And this is a very it is a very hoo-ha way of doing things, but it actually works. Engaging in honest and meaningful conversations with people who are spreading disinformation or specifically misinformation, so there's not the intent to misinform, they're doing it out of a sense of community, they're trying to look out for people, they don't know that it's wrong. And so having really meaningful conversations one-on-one with those people is really important, because what happens, psychologically what happens, you have a friend who posts something, a dear friend, who posts something about drag queens being groomers, right? And then instead of pulling that person aside in a one-on-one conversation via text, via DM, you immediately post back, that's not true, this is what groomers is, this is why what you're posting is ineffectual, this is why what you're posting is a lie. That person shuts down and they dig their heels in even deeper. And you might be even spouting all the facts in the world, it won't matter. The psyche is I am defending myself now publicly because I'm being publicly shamed by somebody who is supposed to be a friend or a family member. So the way that we've seen this work over and over again when it comes to interpersonal communication on disinformation and misinformation is having personal conversations, sitting down with people and actually understanding why they posted something they posted, why they believe something they believe in. That is way more effective than just trying to shut the conversation down publicly. It just doesn't work. And the last thing is go to people you trust. So, there was the conversation that the woman did on the Now This video that basically said, do your own research. I really hate that because that's kind of what got us into this problem in the first place. Well, I do my own research. I don't trust the news. I do my own research. How do you know that the research you're looking at is true, right? We mentioned a scientific journal earlier. Does anybody know of the most trusted scientific journal in America? How many of you have seen scientific journals posted? Couple, right? Do you know how to know if a scientific journal is accurate? Do you know a p-value? If you're a scientist, don't answer. Do you know a p-value? Do you know how to measure it? Do you know the critical review for that specific journal? Some of these things are just impossible. Like, not impossible, but they're such a far reach for regular people to just be like, oh, well, I saw the scientific journal. Let me go ahead and research the journal. Let me see, the different background of this scientific author. Where did they work? Where did they get their education? All these kinds of things. It's almost like it's by the point you're done researching this one thing, it's a month later, right? And the damage has already been done. So, you can be a journalist in this instance. Do you have friends who work in this field that is being discussed, that you trust, that actually know this information? Good example of this is vaccines. They try to do this a lot at the very beginning when, Jenny McCarthy was all like, vaccines cause autism and stuff like that, and everybody was citing this one journal, and this one journal article that has been debunked so many times and yet has been continued to been spreading around like crazy even to this day. There's an argument within the news ecosystem that said, early on, should we have just contacted the experts and said, who is this person that wrote this? Who is this person that authored this? Was there anything wrong with the way they did their study? We should have gone to the experts who work in autism, mental health illness, disability, and vaccines, and asked those questions. Instead, we just parroted what Jenny McCarthy said. We just parroted what this study is because it's a scientific journal. How could it be wrong, right? And so the thing that we do now is when we see something that's suspect, it's in a journal we don't know, it's not in JAMA, it's not in AMA, it's not in Science, we go, okay, who do we trust within our Rolodex that could answer the question of, is this accurate? Is this study that people are sourcing accurate? We're seeing this right now in the legislative, in the Senate and the House, where when it comes to detransitioning, we are seeing the legislators, lawmakers, use studies that have been debunked multiple times because they have been cherry-picking data. And you have people who are experts in the field saying, no, they totally, absolutely, took away a part of their data to make it look like this. And yet they are still using it. But nobody, including us because we don't have the resources, have been able to kind of have been or have not wanted to look at those sources and been like, what about this is wrong? And what about, do the legislators know? I think they do, but do they know that this has been debunked? Do they know the background of the person who has written this? So the last kind of thing is make sure to go to sources that you trust on things you don't know. And it's okay. This little tip, a little reporter tip. I used to cover science for about 5 years at Vice. And one of my favorite things to do was, at the very beginning of every conversation, say, I am dumb as shit. Please talk to me like I'm a third grader on this. I don't understand. Please explain this to me like I'm a third grader. And most scientists who are authored, most people who are trying to get a public health or even a policy objective across, they will explain it to you. Don't be afraid to look dumb in front of these people, because there's a reason why they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to go to school and for years to do this. And that is it. I wanted to open it up to questions. I think I have 15 minutes for questions. Okay, cool. Don't clap yet. It could go downhill from here. Yeah, I only wanted to spend about 40 minutes talking on the deck and then really answer it, because so much of this is personal. Everything that I have been on the bad end of. A good example is these AI deepfakes. I was just talking to a legislator about this yesterday. We were having drinks, and because they're trying to propose something right now in the state that would make it a Class 2 felony if you disseminate deepfakes. And the legislator I was talking to was trying to work with Senator John Kaufman about trying to make it legal. Essentially, if you disseminate things with the intent of harming, then it can be criminalized. But ultimately, I have even come across a few different deepfakes where I'm like, is that the person who said it? Like, how do I even check this? This is a speech. What do I do? Just Google the sentence that he's saying and just like trust it? What do I do? So I'm curious about anybody else's experience with disinformation, misinformation, maybe advice on how to handle it, or maybe tips for everybody else on what you found to be successful, because so much of this is regional. When we go to rural Arizona and we ask people, how do you fix things? So a lot of people say, well, I wish there was like a community gathering where we just talked about this. Some people, when you get to like Mesa or you get to like, Glendale, they're just like, I just would love to like have like a presentation like this. But so when you get to a lot of different areas, they kind of say different things. Like, I want to have more communal conversations about this. So I want to open it up. Has anybody experienced disinformation or misinformation in your time? I see your hand back there.
Thank you. I have a question. It was opened up to question time more than a comment. How do you handle someone or information when somebody says, I trust this source, but they don't know why? They just trust it for no reason. Is it because of their personal belief? I am not pointing fingers. I am simply asking a question. Because that, to me, is a very important thing. Somebody has an opinion where I trust this source, but why?
It's a hard, as we experienced here, why do you trust certain things above others? So much of it is innate, right? I have my trusted news sources, but I also trust certain journalists, right? Covering prisons and police for so many years, there's only so many of us in the nation that like were experts in the field that I knew exactly who to go to for certain things. And I also knew what outlets were doing something wrong. So what I trust, for example, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, when I lived in PA, had a fantastic reporter. Her name is Juliet Reel. Actually is here at the Arizona Republic. She covered prisons very well. But then you go to like their general coverage, and it's like, they're doing it so wrong. They're using the wrong language. They're not talking to the right people, and you're not utilizing the knowledge base within their newsroom to actually report on this correctly. But when you ask people, hey, why do you trust the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette? And they say, well, it's legacy, it's local. And despite the fact that they may be publishing wrong things, it's really hard to shake people and been like, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this coverage that they did right here? And when they didn't admit they're wrong. There's that quote. I'm going to bring it back up again because this is the the public editor over at NPR. And I'm just going to read it if people can't read it in the back. So over-reliance on a chart like this is going to probably give some consumers a false level of faith. I can think of a massive journalistic failure for just about every organization on this chart, and they didn't all come clean about it. And that's very true. So when you ask people, why do you trust this? They're going to kind of like give some kind of answer of like innateness of like, well, they did a story that I saw myself in, right? They covered this issue that I really care about very well. And so they almost have blinders on. There's really no way to combat that except for just like going back with information, being like, okay, so you trust the Arizona Republic. Have you thought about the way that they cover unhoused communities? Are they ignoring people? And when you start digging in and asking questions like that on things that they care about, then they might take a step back. It's really hard when you get into echo chamber things like OAN or Fox News, because I feel like at that point you're kind of like so deep into the rabbit hole that it's really hard to nudge them out. But almost that's like, I actually wonder how many people here watch Fox News to watch the other side? Can I tell you why that's bad? So, the reason why, when we've said this for almost a decade now, ever since like Fox News really became like a really powerful figure. People have been like, well, I watch Fox News because I want to hear the other side. I have a sister who is incredibly, libertarian, very much on the fence when we talk about queer issues. I'm talking about queer issues because it's very much like, within our wheelhouse. And she goes to Fox News because she wants to hear the conservative side of things. And my argument back is like, well, have you thought about reading The Economist instead? Have you thought about reading the Wall Street Journal's coverage of this instead? Because whereas Fox News is elevating bad faith, we were just talking about scientific journals and like how they're being elevated. When you start saying that this side is proposing this, you're elevating that argument. An example of how this works in real life. So after 2016, us in news kind of got a really big dose of medicine that said, were we doing the right thing by treating everything as both sides? Were we doing it correctly by doing this objectively with this big O, objectivism? And is it possible for us as journalists to truly be objective when really we should just be acknowledging our biases and reporting on what we know and acknowledging what we don't know, right? And the big resounding answer was, no, we didn't do it right. We elevated people who had money, had power, and we gave them the equal platform as somebody else who is arguably more thought out and has just a better grasp of things, right? We elevated two people on the same wavelength when one is up here. Good example of this is climate change. For the longest time, we were doing 50-50 coverage of climate change, saying, climate change is happening, 99% of scientists say this is happening, but this 1% is saying this isn't true and giving half the story to it. We're elevating both sides when only one side is accurate and factual. So when I say it may not be good to listen to Fox News, to get the other perspective. It may be good to diversify outside in different conservative news to get other things. And if you're conservative, it may be good to not watch MSNBC. It may be good to kind of look at the New York Times or arguably even Mother Jones, right?
There's another reason for listening to Fox.
We got another question from you, sorry.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I'll let them handle the question, sorry.
Joseph, thank you very much. Very interesting. I wanted to ask you about the role of government. You suggested that government could also help reduce misinformation, but of course we have this problem with the First Amendment. And how would you see that? I'm talking about the federal level now. How would there be a panel, or would there be a group that would review all social media, or how would this work, and what would the laws say so as to permit? I mean, is it against the law to issue bad information, false information?
No, it is not against the law. Our First Amendment really, if you speak to the ACLU, they will say all speech is good, and they will protect even what many of us in this room probably would say bad speech, right? There are, of course, carve-outs through Supreme Court law over the past 100 years that say a certain speech can't be done, I can't think of one off the top of my head, but there's what? You actually can yell fire. That's an old adage. That's actually incorrect. You can if the intent is true. You can't if the intent is to cause harm. So, and there's these little dicing of things that happen. So, for example, I'll give another example: the Hulk Hogan case with that shut down Gawker. You can report on the sex video of Hulk Hogan, but you can't report on the sex video of this private person, right? And that's what shut down Gawker. And it's this kind of splicing of that. All that to say is that no, you can say whatever the hell you want online, pretty much. And that's why it's the role of tech companies to really shut that down. However, when it comes to government, this is where it gets really murky, right? Because I'm not sure of a good law. I mean, it's all kind of novel right now. We were talking about this AI thing and deepfakes. There's not really any case law that says that you can't do this and this is why you can't do this. How do you put parameters on something like this? I don't have the answer to that. I'm not sure that we're going to have the answer for that for like maybe 10 years until some real harm happens, unfortunately. A lot of the things that we see at the federal level with legislation is in response to really bad things happening at the local level, and the state tries to address it, and then it gets appealed all the way to Supreme Court, and then the Congress kind of picks it up.
Back to the Fox News thing, and I raised my hand. I am not a fan, for one thing, but I listen to it for two reasons. One, sometimes they actually will show real news that other stations are not showing. For example, Biden gave a speech the other day. They ran the whole thing, whereas MSNBC and CNN cut him off with their commentary, and I just wanted to see the whole thing. But the real reason is mostly for shits and giggles.
Right. Entertainment. Entertainment tonight.
And I want to see what the other side is saying so that I can get angry.
Right. You want to fuel that fire.
That's a third reason that is seldom. I can only take maybe 5 minutes at a time, but I want to see how they're reacting to certain stories. And you know, I know what they're going to say, but they're constantly talking about the border crisis, and I don't really think there is. This morning on the drive in, I was listening just for a brief minute. It was all about how the cartels are sending, you know, murderers and druggies and whatever across the border, and they're beating the same drum, and I'm tired of it. But still, I hope maybe they'll say something rational. But that maybe is too much to hope for.
That's fair. I see. Well, the other picture. Yeah.
Hi. We talk of AI, or you've talked of AI more just from a fake, but can we harness AI to watchdog these, the pop-up of all of these type systems? It'll mean probably creating your own chatbot function to do this in real time, but kind of a follow-up or how I can see this weave into what are your thoughts of Wikipedia? Because I used that in 2016. I had this going back and forth with somebody who said, oh, you know, Wikipedia is this left-wing type thing. But to me, Wikipedia is one of the most, how can I say, verified. They have different levels of, you know, trust that they'll even rate themselves. So kind of a dual question of Wikipedia
So there's two
and AI.
questions. There's one about like how to harness AI for good, and then there's also like, do we trust Wikipedia? So I'll answer the quick one, Wikipedia. Trust it as far as you can throw it. There's actually a really fascinating video. When I was in grad school, there's this video shown because we were talking about, like, we can't, obviously, as journalists, we don't use Wikipedia for anything, but it's a good source point for, like, the very beginning conversations, because they did this video where basically it showed a time lapse of somebody posting something inaccurate. And the way that it was corrected, and overcorrected, and undercorrected, and then corrected again, like within 24 hours, there were 100 different corrections and citations. And so I trust Wikipedia as far as, like, you know, I'm trying to win an argument in like a bar, but I wouldn't go far as, like, you know, if there's somebody spreading disinformation of like vaccines or something like that online, I probably wouldn't go to Wikipedia because it is an open source thing, right? For general knowledge, absolutely great when it comes to that. And generally, I could say you could probably trust it to some level of degree. Like I said, as far as you can throw it. When it comes to AI for good, we actually use AI, right? Not in, like, you know, a reporting sense where we, like, you know, have AI generate content, but we use AI to, like, scrape the legislature's bills. We use AI to, when I have a massive data set, I throw it into ChatGPT and I say, hey, what does this mean, right? You know, AI only goes so far because I take that data set and then I go to my data reporter and say, is this accurate? Can you double check this? It basically acts like a first step. So we have a long way to go with AI and, like, trust. But yeah, I mean, we're even seeing, so Gannett, the paper that the organization that owns the Arizona Republic, they were trying to do AI for sports coverage, and we all kind of think, well, sports coverage, who cares? Like, it's just like puts numbers on a page. AI was getting things wrong, right? Or it was like spewing out things that like were just like it was correct, but it was like worded in a different way that made it seem incorrect. So we have a long way to go when it comes to AI for good when it comes to news and misinformation. I wouldn't say that AI is like it's a different thing because it's not actively trying to push you in a way, right? It's not disinformation. This is an example of like AI being used and it's just gathering everything from the internet, and there's so much misinformation and malinformation on the internet or disinformation on the internet that it's going to spit out, if you're asking a really controversial question, it's probably going to spit out some like controversial answers.
Thank you. During 2020 and 2021, I was trying to get a pulse of what was going on in different cities with protests and riots, etc. And I would try Googling in local news and trying to find out if there were protests like here in Phoenix area, etc. And I wouldn't find a whole lot of success with what was going on nationwide. I would go to Al Jazeera or another foreign news source of what their US news, and I would find very concise, fact-driven, just detail without left, right, or center. It was just on this date, this time, this occurred, and it was kind of refreshing to find just the facts of what was going on without emotion. But I don't know if you use any foreign.
Yeah, I used to work overseas, and so I have a set of like trusted outlets I used to work for. Like I used to work for CBC, did stuff for, Al Jazeera went out there, Channel 4. So I mean, yes, but I would say that there's a difference when you're trying to understand kind of national politics. I mean, here's the thing: when you're trying to trust what information you're getting from national sources, also just be aware of like how they're positing things. My biggest thing during 2020 was that, I don't think it comes as a shock to anybody here that local news has been decimated over the past 10 years. That's why you're seeing organizations like us, Luminaria, Tucson Agenda, Tucson Sentinel, Arizona Center for Investigative Reporting, all these local outlets kind of pop up because we see a dearth in coverage locally, because national news is being fueled by clicks. It's being very much treated like entertainment news. I was recently in New York speaking, and I met with an old coworker of mine from Vice, and we had this kind of like, we don't agree on much of anything, but one thing we could agree on is the fact that the New York Times is very much treating their news outlet like an entertainment outlet, right? And so even though you get some really great news, it's all very much like they have a music producer that's supposed to increase suspense. They have, the Hulu shows that are meant to drive narratives. All these different things that are supposed to kind of reel you in through entertainment rather than just news. The same thing happens overseas, but they're funded differently, right? And so they're funded differently, and they have much more strict standards. So, for example, when I was working overseas, like investigations are really hard to do overseas because you do not have a lot of protections as a journalist. Like, we're publishing a story next week that I'm sure we will get sued for because it's, taking down a private individual. Luckily, in the States, we have really solid protections that you have to have a high bar for defamation, right, or libel. In the UK or Canada, no such protections exist. It really is fly by the seat of your pants. And so you trust it, but then also understand like this is like the slicing of information, right? It's yes and. It's the ultimate lawyer answer. Yes, trust international news outlets for covering national stuff here. Also understands that they have a different edict, they have a different purpose, and when it comes to national outlets covering something local, the same thing exists.
Joseph, thanks again for your talk.
Sure.
You asked if we had encountered any examples of disinformation recently in our lives. And I just wanted to mention that I felt this with the Senate Bill 1279 recently, which was to prohibit satanic erections on public property. And my main concern with it is that, it was missed by Senator Jake Hoffman and a lot of the other rest of the committee in the Senate, the truth that the Satanic Temple is a religion, and Hoffman especially tried to play it off like, of course it's not a religion. You can't have Satan be a religion. Satan's the enemy of God. That's not a religion. So I guess, and is it disinformation, misinformation, or just a lack of research on behalf of our electeds? And what are ways that we can help make sure that our electeds are more informed on the truth?
That is $1 million question, right? Because, I mean, trust your elected officials like you trust a lawyer. So there are certain ones that you trust for certain things and one things you just don't trust because you just don't trust them. When it came to something like that, is that an example of disinformation or malinformation? Like, Hoffman, Wotsak, they're not dumb people. I mean, they're in power, they got to where they are, they have multiple conversations with people, they have conversations with lawyers, they have conversations with advocates every single day. It's what they actually choose to continue to like listen to and kind of craft legislation that really matters. I would argue that something like that legislation is malinformation. You know, it's saying that this organization is saying Satan can't have a religion. Like, what? Like, for God's sakes, like, literally, we can craft up a religion for any fucking reason. Any reason, and just build off of that. Like, it's so easy to establish a religion in this country and like market it as a 501c3. So it's false on its face, right? There's no good way to answer that. I mean, we've had conversations with people at the Republic and others saying like, hey, are you going to challenge them on this? And this goes to kind of like, I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but like, how far does malinformation need to go before you stop it? So we cover queer communities, obviously. There's a number of bills that target trans and non-binary people in the state right now, more than last year, more than the year before, right? We have a bill that's going to absolutely sail through the House and the Senate that is going to be on the ballot, which bans trans people from being recognized by their gender at school, also using bathrooms, right? It's going to sail through, it's going to be on your ballot in November, right? That is a bill that we will focus on as a news organization, because that is going in front of you. The other bills are absolutely going to be vetoed. And so when news organizations like myself put resources behind that, it goes to elevating arguments again. Are we elevating these bad faith arguments just because they want to? We know this is what they want. We've had conversations with them on record that say, I know it's going to get vetoed, but people need to talk about it, right? People need to know what's going on. And so the answer is that this is all malinformation that I imagine these a lot of like malinformation, bad information that they're putting into these bills, knowing very much so that is not genuine. It is to elevate an argument that they know is a one-sided culture war. So that's my stance on it.
I have a couple of sons who have imbibed heavily in the Kool-Aid being put out. And I got into a discussion with them with regards to immigration, how many came in through Trump, how many came in through Biden, and how they compare. And I looked up the numbers in what I thought was, I Googled it, okay?
Right. We all Google it.
And I looked at the numbers, and basically they're comparable. But how do you get through to these people that is the case? I showed them the numbers. They said, oh, they're wrong.
There you go. That's a big thing. Oh, the information you have is wrong. At some point, we have this a lot. We have this conversation a lot. Like, there is this woman named Brittany, crap, I'm going to forget her last name. She was the former president of Teach for America, and years ago, she did a speech that I was present for where, I mean, I think the term woke has been weaponized a bit when really it just means being empathetic. But she was giving this speech very much in line with this. You have people who are fast asleep and happily fast asleep. You have people who are waking up, and then you have people who are woke, right? Our goal as humans is to address the people who are slowly waking up. Because the people who are fast asleep, you can't jolt them awake because they'll fight, right? And also, you're yelling at a person who is asleep, right? You're having a conversation with somebody who's in bed with you who's asleep. Like, just like you're not getting through. Somebody who is waking up, though, that is where your power lies. And I have similar problems with my own family. My own family, like I said, my sister's libertarian, and we have a lot of different, opposing views on things. And kind of the way that we approach it is we talk to each other in a respectful manner. That has changed. Great example of this. My sister doesn't believe that the term. Oh God, it's being recorded. I hope she doesn't see this. No. It's fine. I mean, I'll make an example of her. She had this really. It was a good question though. It was a good question. It was after Elon Musk wrote on X that cis is a slur, right? And cisgender for people, meaning that you were born in the sex that you were assigned as. And she said, how is that not a slur? I don't want to talk to somebody who has the mental illness of thinking they're a woman when they're a man. Right? That was the conversation she had. And the way that I attacked that, somebody who is dead fast in their theory on this, well, do you think there should be a medical, understanding of what differentiates you from a trans woman? Understanding that you will never believe that trans women are women, do you at least agree that there should be a differentiation between somebody like you and somebody like them? And that was the conversation of, oh, well, I guess so. And you kind of soften that argument, right? And then the more that you're able to soften those arguments among your peers and your family, the more they're willing to have more open conversations. If I just went at her and I just said, you're a fucking bigot, that would have gone nowhere, right? So it goes back to those conversations, these interpersonal conversations that are really meaningful to advance cooperation among all of us.
Hi. So I like Google News and other aggregators,
right?
Although they tend to silo me a little bit.
The algorithm.
Do you have advice as to how one can go out and efficiently with their time try to find the greatest number of sources? For instance, does the Independent News Network have its own aggregator?
Yeah. So, for example, like I said, we're part of INN, and INN has their own news aggregator for news organizations that are trusted and verified and stuff like that. There's other things for queer issues if you're interested. There's the Trans Journalists Association, which has a news aggregator. There's the NLGJA, which has a news aggregator. There's plenty of these news organizations. Trusting News is one of them that has news aggregators. So that would be a good place to start. The problem with aggregators is, we love the algorithm, right? We love, the echo chamber sometimes. Sometimes it just feels so good to just, know that what you're reading is very much going to be in line with your views. And also, it also feels good to go to a news source knowing that they're going to get a trusted perspective that might enlighten you on the same side, or at least the same topic. But, when it comes to aggregation, when it comes to the algorithm, it's always a tricky thing, right? I trust Apple News aggregation because whereas Google is aggregating based off of my searches and based off of my interests, I'm not searching through Apple, right? They're not really capturing, also because I have it in my settings that don't capture certain search information. So I'm getting really even-keeled, different sources, different news sources on various different topics. So something to think about. And then... sorry.
Back here. Do you ever speak to students? Do you go to schools? Are you invited to speak to students in schools about this topic? And secondly, do you know of any efforts to include information literacy courses, or at least discuss information literacy in schools? Because it seems to me that young people especially are primarily getting their information from social media, and they're the ones who need to know this information.
Sure. So two things. Yes, I speak at schools. In fact, this is something that like it's evolved over the past 6 years, because my first time with this was talking to elementary school kids about like how they consume news, right? And then of course I speak at like, the journalism schools and stuff like that, but like that's their job to kind of learn like all the sort of stuff we're talking about. There's one thing I want to push back on you though. It's actually not Gen Z or Gen Alpha that is spreading the most misinformation. It's actually the Boomer and Gen X generation. And the way we know that is because if, like, from certain subsets of data, specifically X data, which, there's been a massive exodus of X, but what we know is kind of what we know. The people who are putting those community notes on Facebook and on Instagram and on X is actually Gen Z and Gen Alpha. Some are millennial as well. They're the ones who are actually being more media literate. They're the ones who are actually saying, this post seems wrong. Let me Google it. Let me do some more information. Let me add my notes to it. They're the ones who are actually correcting. So when we talk about it, yes, it's important that every single generation has an advanced set of media literacy now more than ever because of social media, but be wary in that conversation, which we all do, which is damn the next generation. Because it's actually our generation that's doing it. There's been a few more. And also, how much time do we have?
We got one more. This last one.
Okay. I'm free. I'm free until 12:30, so you guys can hound me as much as you want.
Thanks. I'm new, so if I put my foot in my mouth, please forgive me. But I'm in behavioral health, and I really appreciate the fact that there are so many, even within this room, there's so many diverse ideas and ways to approach things. One thing I found in my, albeit limited world, is when I'm encountering someone who comes to me with a vastly different opinion, like the gentleman over there that was talking about his family and friends that are vastly different. I know that the brain, when people are in MRIs and they see a picture up above their face and it shows like a puppy dog or a cat, everybody's brain lights up in the same part, like, oh, puppy, oh, cat. And then when it is a religious icon or a political icon or something for which they feel very vehement about, the part of the brain that lights up is not the prefrontal cortex, where it is our logic, where we could have civil debates. It's the limbic system, which is the emotional part of the brain. And so when you speak about, your sister, how you kind of took away the emotion and go to the logic, I think that can happen only when there's a relationship.
Correct. And
agreed upon mutual respect. But when somebody sticks in their heels and like debating online, like you're an idiot, that it's almost like a snow globe where when the emotions get lit up, you shake it and you can't see what's inside. And my hope would be that everybody sincerely thinks they are doing the right thing, but they are so misguided by what they don't know or brainwashing or whatever it is, me included, that we have to turn down the volume on emotions first in order to see human to human.
So when I was talking earlier about like the way that you approach people and the psychology around it, you put it into perfect terms because I didn't have the words prefrontal cortex and like limbic system. So like I appreciate you adding that in. But that is essentially what happens. You can't argue with people when you're defensive. You have to appeal to them on a logical sense because Stead, I can't remember his last name, Stead from the New York Times, he has this perfect line that I love, that lit up my brain when I heard it. It's like, all politics is personal. It's not logical. All politics is personal. It's emotional. And so the moment you can bypass those emotions and speak to somebody on a logical level, that's where you're going to be successful.
All righty, that's all we have time for as far as the recording is concerned. However, Joseph did say that he was going to stick around for a little bit. We do have a board meeting here at noon, but before we actually can end the recording, we do have a tradition here at the Humanist Society of Greater Phoenix to mug our speakers.
Wonderful.
So thank you so much. Give a warm round of applause. Thank you so much. And for those of you who are in the room or watching online, as of today's recording, we are at 955 subscribers, 45 away from our first goal of 1,000 subscribers, which puts us in a new category on YouTube. So if you're not yet subscribed on a YouTube channel, visit YouTube and go to Humanist Society of Greater Phoenix, and you will find us. Please subscribe. Please like the videos. Please watch the videos if you're cooking or if you're outside gardening. It's a great way to get some view counts up and go from there. So thank you so much. And again, another warm round of applause for Joseph, please.
If you appreciate the Humanist Society of Greater Phoenix and would like to see more, then subscribe to our channel and check us out on Patreon. Links are in the description.